what it means to be authentic. Everybody talks about that nowadays. It seems to be the buzzword. How would you define that, and why is it so important?
Authenticity is being the way we are and allowing other people to be the way we are. And I don't know, imagine I took you to a company and I'm showing you around and I say, okay, in this room here, we have our innovation department. And you look in and everybody's wearing blue shirts and a tie. You'd think, what kind of innovation department is this?
Welcome to the Hands-On Business Podcast. Where else are you going to come to get tips, tricks, and advice on growing your business? As you know, what people tend to love about this podcast is that it is a place where you can hear real business leaders discussing systems, methodologies, and strategies that they have used to help them catapult growth in their business. So I'm your podcast host, Hakeem Adebiyi, and I've grown several small businesses to multi-million-pound enterprises and noticed that there wasn't really a place that focused on where I was, i.e. growing a small business. All of the content that seemed to be out there was about big business and often just a lot of theory and no practical implementable advice, which is exactly why I set up this podcast. So take a listen, enjoy, and start implementing the strategies that you hear on the podcast. Happy listening. If you've been listening to me for any period of time, then you'll know that I like to talk about leadership. And I've had quite a few people on to discuss this topic, but every single one of my guests have mentioned about the importance of authenticity in leadership. So I decided that maybe it's time to do a whole episode around what that actually means. So here we are. Today, I want to talk about authentic leadership and how that will help you grow your business. So I invited Meyer onto the show, who is a psychotherapist. He's a business consultant, and he's also author of the Amazon best-selling book, The Art of Being Authentic. So welcome, Mark. Very, very pleased that you could join me today. So
Thank you.
Going to get... So thank you very much. Yeah, and we've been talking off camera, so some of these may seem a bit duplicated because I've been, just engaging and getting a bit more information. But if you were to try and define what it means to be authentic, everybody talks about that nowadays. It seems to be the buzzword. How would you define that, and why is it so important?
Well, that's a two-part question, of course. And if we take the first part, what does it mean to be authentic? I think there's an interesting thing about the word authentic, and that's the way we use it, because we use it in a lot of different ways. So we might say that if you see the Mona Lisa, it's an authentic Leonardo da Vinci painting. So by that, you mean that authentic means that it's original, it's unique. But on the other hand, Hakeem, if I asked you to describe an authentic Italian gangster, what would he look like? Well, maybe you'd say, well, he has a suit and tie and he has his hair back and a big cigar. And why would you describe him like that? Well, basically because he looks like all the rest of them, right? So all of a sudden, we're using authentic to describe a copy. So it's both an original, but it's also a copy. So I think that the way we use it can make it a little bit confusing for us, because it doesn't do the word authentic very much justice when we try to use it to describe copies or stereotypes that live up to certain criteria. That's also something we'll get into that can be a risk when it comes to leadership, because we'll look to other leaders and try to sort of emulate them a little bit too much. Because the essence of being authentic is about being true to yourself. It's, if we look at a word, auto, meaning self, and hendes is the doer, the being, it's be yourself. But really looking at the word, it's about being true to your values. It's about being true to your wants, to your needs, and being who you are.
And it seems like an almost a silly question, but why is that so important in a leadership position or try to grow your business? Because just when you define it there, you've got the original, which it couldn't be authentic, but also copying other people in certain circumstances can also mean authenticity. So what I'm assuming, based on what you said, the original bit, which is which I think is what we're going to talk about in terms of authentic leadership, i.e. being true to yourself. And as a friend of mine always says that their mother used to say when they were younger, be yourself because everyone else is taken. That's about authenticity.
Yeah.
So So why is that so important, and why is it such a buzzword now when it wasn't necessarily so much in the past?
Well, I think the reason why it wasn't in the past is basically because of the way it was presented. Like you say, okay, just be yourself, right? Like that advice you get from a friend or a parent, right? And the problem with that is I think it's a just, right? It sounds like we should go on autopilot and maybe not really make any effort. I mean, it can sound like that, and then then I'm not going to be myself. I want to make an effort. Then that becomes the opposition to it, right? Um, it's important for us, both as individuals in life, of course, because the more authentic we are, the happier we're going to be. And that's important. But that's also important when you're a leader because that reflects on the people around you. They can see when you feel good about yourself. But when you're being authentic, one of the key components or one of the key effects of being authentic is that people trust you more. And trust is very important in leadership. And why is that important? Well, it's important because when we have trust, then we can build relationships. And leadership, in essence, is a lot about relationships. So that's important. You could also say that being authentic also requires that you know yourself. If you know yourself, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to make better decisions and also in complex situations because you know who you are, you know what's important for you. And when there's no straight answer, you have that to guide you. So better relationships and better decisions. And those are two key components in leadership and in business, and especially if you want to grow your business.
Yeah, no, I like that, but especially about the knowing yourself, because it's impossible to be authentic if you don't actually know yourself, because you don't know what authenticity is for you without knowing yourself. So just a bit about yourself then, because obviously you've worked in lots of corporate positions. You've slightly pivoted, and you now talk very much about a purposeful life rather than a goal-driven one, which is about, again, authenticity. Because if you don't know yourself and you're not, it's difficult to have a purpose or to have the right authentic purpose for yourself rather than just a list of goals. So can you just explain, how you define the difference between a purposeful life and a goal-driven one?
Definitely. Purpose and goals are two different things, right? We live in a world that's traditionally, it favors goals, it favors goal settings. But there's an important part of goals, which is purpose. Because if you don't have a purpose with a goal, then it doesn't make any sense. Goals in themselves are meaningless. We often think that something will happen once we reach a goal, and when we reach a goal, then something will materialize. But that will only materialize the things we want to materialize if there is a purpose. Purpose comes before. This is the reason why I'm doing these things. And that's also why, it makes no sense to start a company and say, what's it going to do? Well, it's going to make money. Well, that'll be a ridiculous goal, right? You need to narrow it down a little more, right? And the more you narrow down your goal, well, hopefully, if you narrow it down to what your purpose is, then it's going to be a lot better once you actually reach those goals because it will then materialize your purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it certainly does. It's almost like let's say, for example, your goal is making money. That's almost a byproduct of the purpose, isn't it? If you have a purpose, and we were talking about if it's purpose and you're doing something you enjoy, something that you're focused on, something that's going to bring you happiness, joy, whatever it is, then the money is a secondary thing, but it may still be one of your goals. Is that kind of a decent way to define it all?
I think there's a very decent way to define it. I think you can also define it another way. In another way, you could also say that because a lot of people will say that, well, authentic leadership. What can it get me on the bottom line, right? Or what kind of money am I gonna make? But you
Yeah,
got to realize that's not a goal in itself without a purpose. It's you can compare it to if I asked you, Hakeem, what's your purpose in life? And you'll be like, I want to live till I'm 200. I want to survive.
yeah.
And of course you want to do that because that's the prerequisite of you being here. You want to live, and of course a company needs to make money. Otherwise it's going to cease to exist. So as such, you need something more. You need a purpose.
Yeah, no, completely. And just on the point about driving your bottom line, because I know that people will be listening thinking, yeah, great, we're going to talk about authentic leadership. We're going to really get an understanding of it. But guaranteed, some people will be thinking, yeah, but how is it going to drive my bottom line? So do you have any personal stories or examples of where somebody's almost, well, either they've just already been an authentic leader and that's led to decent business growth, or they've changed from a goal driven to a purposeful driven life, and that's driven their business?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of examples. If I had to use an example from my own life, I think that a good example is when authentic leadership was actually demonstrated to me, or one of the first times I noticed that. It was some years ago when I was a CEO of a tech company. I was also a shareholder in company, and there were several others of the partners that were minority shareholders. And there was the majority shareholder, which was another company, and the CEO of that company was also the chairman of the board at our tech company. So we're having this board meeting. He is representing the chairman of the board is representing the majority shareholder, and we're disagreeing because you do that in boardrooms. You disagree with where should the company go, what should we do, what should we spend here, and we've had a long discussion, and we just could not come to an agreement. So at one point, I'm sort of like, okay, we're not getting anywhere. So I look at him and I say, listen, I mean, you hold the majority of the shares. Why don't you just tell us how you want it done, and then we'll do it? You know, I mean, he's the guy who makes the calls, right? He's the chairman of the board. And he looks at me and he goes, I don't want to do that. I want us to agree. And in the moment, I thought, what's wrong with him? Just tell me what to do and we get on with it, right? So we sat down and we came after a lengthy discussion to an agreement because he said, listen, don't want to tell people what to do. I want us to agree. So he brought his personal values to the table. This was his personal value. I don't want to tell other people what to do. I want us all to agree. But that turned out to be a huge gift for the company because the boardroom after that just worked really well. People respected each other, and we were in this together to find a solution together. Did that translate into a better profit? I'm sure it did. I can't prove it. I can't draw a line from that meeting to the results on the bottom line saying this was because of it and nothing else. But I'm sure it did.
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? It's because you do get lots of people, and we've all been in those situations where you think, well, you don't agree with me, just tell me. Since you're the boss, you tell me, and I'll work out how to factor that in. But I think as you just defined there, you get a much more coherent group of people when people are coming to an agreement. It doesn't mean that you agree 100% on everything, but you come to an agreement that this is the best way. And I think the one person, one of the people I work with, best defined it by saying, "Look, I'm very agnostic about where the ideas come from. It's just about getting to the right place rather than me saying, well, I'm your boss, so we're going to do it my way." Well, no, we want to do it. We want to do it right. Wherever the idea comes from, to get to an agreement is the best way to do it. So I think that's a really, really good example. So just on that, because you described it as basically him bringing his personal values to the table, which I think is really important. So what would you describe are the key qualities of an authentic leader then, if you were trying to define what an authentic leader looks like, almost like a tick box? This should have this value, that quality.
Yes. And it's a tricky thing to describe, right? Because, authenticity is, of course, unique and it's different from everyone, for everyone. I think definitely the fact that you as a leader bring your personal values to the table. And because he did that in that moment, he brought his personal values to the table. And that made it significant. Could hear his intention behind it. If this was something he picked up from a management book and he didn't really believe in, we maybe would have done 1 or 2 rounds more and then, okay, we agree to disagree or something else, right? So bringing your personal values is definitely something that describes an authentic leader. What also describes an authentic leader, I think, is also that you disregard your ego a bit, right? because your ego would grab onto this. Just tell me what to do. Your ego will say, "That's fine, Akeem. I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to feel like a big man, right?" So this putting aside your ego, and basically you're embracing a bit of empathy, right? Because you say to the other people in this, he's sort of like between the lines. He said, "Okay, I understand you guys. I understand where you're coming from, but we need to find this solution, right?" So he had the self-esteem to sort of stick to his personal belief. So definitely you need empathy, but you also need self-awareness, because when you sit in a situation like that, you need to know yourself. You need to know what's going to come from this. What's going to happen when I walk out the door? I think he knew if I walk out the door, us not agreeing, and me just telling them what to do, I would have compromised something in myself, and that would have had a consequence for him. What exactly that consequence would have been, I don't know. Only he knows. But self-awareness is also a key component.
Excellent. And so what I've written down is personal values, disregard your ego, empathy, and self-awareness, which I think if people have those key facets, they're going to be a much better leader than they would otherwise be. And then, because you've talked about empathy, and is empathy, or is there a connection between empathy and emotional intelligence? How would you see those two things come together? Because emotional intelligence used to be a very, very topical word. It seems to have died down a bit now, but it's still very, very important.
Yeah, definitely. There's a connection between empathy and emotional intelligence. Empathy is your ability to sort of understand other people, understand their emotions, right? And that's crucial in leadership, because basically it is when you understand people that people will follow you, and we see that when we look at, if you look in society, you'll see all of a sudden you'll see some politician from some sort of extreme wing, right or left, I don't care. They'll pop up. They'll have some extreme ideas, and you'll think, wow, who will ever go for that? And then you get surprised and you say, okay, there's a lot of people that go for that, and then you think, wow, do they really buy into all these crazy solutions he has? And they don't. They, they don't buy into the solutions. They buy into. They feel understood. They feel that these politicians understand. So they actually don't care about the solutions, whether it's building walls or, rearranging the economy or whatever it is. It's just the fact that they feel understood. And when they do that, they become extremely loyal. You'll see it in therapy. Yeah, you'll see with a therapist, if a therapist understands his client, well, then only then is the client ready to sort of accept whatever plan the therapist has laid out for a better well-being, right? So understanding people is crucial, and you need empathy for that.
And just on that, because it's very interesting. Because as you started talking about some of the political leaders, certain people, especially when you mentioned build a wall, are popping into my mind. So, what's the difference then between emotional intelligence and potentially manipulation? Because when I'm looking at those emotional leaders, sometimes you think there's a fine line between those two things.
Yeah, there is, and it actually goes to authenticity quite a lot. I write about it in my book also, because it has to do on a personal level. It has a lot to do with ego versus self-esteem. And if you are a very ego-driven person, you're searching for external validation all the time. Well, that is always because you have a low self-esteem. And this ego-driven, I want to accomplish something that'll prove that I am okay, combined with this low self-esteem, is in essence inauthentic. In order for us to be authentic, we need to have a high self-esteem and a low sense of ego. You see that in great politicians and civil rights leaders, be it in Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King. You need this self-esteem. And the reason why this ties into being authentic is because being authentic, being yourself, comes at a cost. When that chairman of the board said, no, I want us all to agree, we could have all looked at him and said, "What's wrong with you? We can't spend time on this," got up and left the boardroom if that was what we wanted to do, right? So it comes at a risk of not fitting in. And the risk of not fitting in, well, if you don't have the self-esteem to take that plunge, to say, I'm going to be authentic, I'm going to be me, then you're not going to do it. And we sometimes mistake ego for authenticity. So it sounds like this person doesn't care about what anybody does. He's just, he wants to build walls, he wants to do this and that. But it's not authenticity. It's ego searching for external validation.
And just continuing on the sort of like government vein, because obviously government, I suppose, when you're looking at leadership examples, they're kind of at the head of the pecking order in terms of their position because they're running countries. So can you think from an authenticity point of view, the reason why, if you look around, certainly the Western world at the moment, the leaders, there seems to be a massive rift between the leaders and the general population. Do you see that yourself? And if you do, how do you think that's linked to authenticity or lack of it?
Yeah, I think that it is linked to lack of authenticity, because if empathy is a requirement to be authentic, well, empathy is about embracing. It's about understanding. It's not only about you being you. It's also about allowing other people to be who they are. And it happens. We can have an authentic conversation, you and I, together. It happens. It doesn't happen alone. It's very hard for me to be. If I'm alone in this room, it's hard to define whether or not I'm being authentic, right? It happens when I'm interacting with other people. And definitely the lack of authenticity, the more ego we have, well, that will create division. It'll create division from who's running the country to the citizens of that country. It'll create the same in a company, who's leading the company and the people working there, and it'll do the same in our personal relationships.
And I suppose the next question to lead on from that is that, because you obviously see lots of, as you've defined it just there, I suppose, inauthentic leaders in positions of power, not just in the government, which is what we were talking about ostensibly there, but also in businesses that do well to an extent. So if you're a leader that's doing well, I mean, I have this conversation with my children all the time, whereby, in the past you'd have said to your child, "Oh, you shouldn't lie because you won't get very far." And then they look at some of our leaders and think, "Well, they lie all the time and they're doing very well for themselves." So it's a difficult argument to have these days. But so I suppose the question I want to know is, so if you're doing well, what's your motivation to become an authentic leader if you're ego driven and you're still moving up, whether that's a career ladder or a political ladder? What's the motivation to actually say, well, actually, I need to be more authentic and actually be an authentic leader rather than doing what I'm currently doing?
Yeah, that is a really, really good question, because what is the motivation for that? I think that ultimately, if you ask me, I'll say whatever you're chasing in life, business or personal, if you're not being authentic about it, you're not going to get you're not going to get what you want, what you really want, this outcome that you expect. You need the self-awareness that comes along with authenticity to get where you want to really be in life. Otherwise, you end up chasing goals that will not give you any, of what you really want. So, that's one reason for doing it. But I think also at the end of the day, and this is where authentic leadership for some people can be a little tricky, but that is, if you say, I'm going to do authentic leadership because then I'm going to make a lot more money, then it kind of becomes inauthentic. Because, and that's the tricky part, because you got to do it because it's the right thing to do. You have to do it because this is what you believe is the right thing to do. Because if you do it with another intention, then it becomes inauthentic. That's one of the most important things with authenticity, and what we evaluate other people on when it comes to authenticity. That's the intention behind it. If I find out that you said, I'm doing this because this is this, and then I later find out your intention was something completely different, I'll immediately label it as inauthentic. Well, that was very inauthentic. He had a completely different intention with that. And that's the same we have as human beings and in business as well when we are leaders. We have to do it because it's the right thing. Because doing it for any other reason is going to be inauthentic.
And is inauthentic leadership sustainable? I'm trying to get off the political angle, but I look at So carry on.
Yeah. No, it's not sustainable because inauthentic is basically faking it, and once you're faking it, it usually has a shelf life, right? It'll run out. Authenticity has sustainability, and authenticity, in the same way as I described with the board meeting, I think for a lot of companies, it can do something for them. It can build something for them. I'm thinking of an example right now, which is it's going to be a simplified example for this conversation. I'm thinking of Apple. I'm thinking of Stephen Jobs, and there are plenty of factors. But one thing that Steve Jobs did, he didn't like his computer, the ventilator, was making too much noise, right? So he made a computer that was completely silent. In itself, not a revenue generating thing to do, right? Then he thought the fonts should be prettier. So he would make the fonts in the Word program, he would make the fonts very nice. In itself, again, not very revenue generating. It was his personal beliefs that he brought through, but in itself they were not revenue generating. But the sum of all those things became a very, very good product, in many ways a superior product to a lot of the, compared to a lot of its competitors. So, it did bring revenue. It did bring growth.
Yeah, because I suppose, when I look at Apple, and obviously some people like Steve Jobs, some people don't like him, some people who work with him didn't like him, but I think they'd all accept that he was authentic. And he seemed to me, when I used to listen to him, that his purpose was to make technology better. To make technology better, make it more intuitive, make it more fun, which is why, Apple still can charge significantly more for pretty much the same product. And I think what you said is really important there, because a lot of the products that he brought to bear were not revolutionary products. They were products that other people had made or other people have tried to launch, and he just made them better, more intuitive, more customer focused, and that revolutionized the tech space, to be honest. So I think it's really important to actually think of those things, because when we were talking about the purpose for being authentic, what was running through my mind was, again, going back to the purpose versus the goals, that when you're authentic, you're being driven by a purpose. If you're being driven by your real purpose, then all of a sudden, health, mental health, happiness, are all wrapped up into that authenticity, because it's actually what's at the core of your soul, that you're actually really externalizing and working on that. And the person that jumped into my mind, I have no idea why, was Keanu Reeves. Now, I don't know him personally, but everything you read about him, it tends to be about positive interactions and relationships that he's had and things he's doing for people who are strangers. And you never tend to hear issues about he's had an argument with this person, this is a problem, that's a problem. And it just really seems that he's living his life along moral values, his own moral and personal values. And that seems to be driving quite a lot of happiness into his life and the people around him. Whereas when you compare that to some other people who, as you were describing, as ego-driven, even when they get to the halcyon heights, they never seem to be happy. There always seems to be either being horrible to somebody or doing something nasty or not being pleasant. And it seems to me that and I don't know whether this is true, but authenticity and authentic leadership leads to generally more pleasant interactions with people than inauthentic leadership. I don't know whether there's any data on that or whether that's something that you see, but that's certainly my observations.
I think your observations are absolutely correct, Akeem. I mean, when we are being authentic, when we are showing empathy and we are allowing people to be their authentic self, well, then as we talked about before, it's going to be sustainable. People are going to be happier. And when they are happier and they know that they matter and they know they can be themselves, they're going to come up with good ideas as well. They're going to, you're not as a leader, you don't have to bring everything to the table. An authentic leader doesn't say, I got everything figured out. Here's how we're going to do it. No, an authentic leader says, okay, here's a challenge. We need to solve it together, right?
And I think that, I think that just leads, as you mentioned earlier, to better relationships, better decision making, therefore better outcomes. So in terms of, you've been talking about authentic leadership. You've written a book on authenticity. What would you say are the common misconceptions about authenticity and authentic leadership, which may lead to people thinking, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do what I was doing anyway.
That's a very good question. I think two things. First of all, that people say, okay, think this is just a soft skill. It's not gonna get you anywhere, right? It's gonna get you a long way. Whether you're a one-man company or you're 1,000 people, it's gonna do something for you. So that's definitely a misconception. I also think it's a misconception, and this becomes more relevant now. It's not a nice to have. I think it becomes more and more need to have, and I think we have to look at how we're working. Right? If we're gonna, I don't want to turn this into a history lesson, but if we look way back, maybe our parents' generation or their parents, right? People had jobs because they wanted to survive. That's why you had a job. You wanted to survive, and it didn't matter if it was a coal mine, it was bad for you, and your boss was a real jerk. You had that job because you wanted to survive. That changed for maybe our parents' generations, but definitely for us, we start working because we want better living standards, right? We want to be able to travel. We want to be able to have a nice house and all of these things. The generation we have now that are coming out there now, they're not working to survive. They don't need that. I don't. Certainly not in the Western world, and anywhere in the world. If you're from the middle class, not you don't work to survive, but you actually don't work either just to improve your living situation, right? Because you want to try to live in a nice house. Well, they're going to get their friends together. They're going to Airbnb a villa in Portugal. They're going to work remotely. They want access to the TV channels that, when I was a kid, I remember there was one dad down the street that had a satellite dish, and we would all run, to see that TV program, right? Doesn't matter. They'll buy Netflix subscription or they'll borrow a login, right? So right now, they don't want to work to improve their living standards. They want to work to survive. They want to work because they want to make an impact. They want to make a difference. And for that, we definitely need a purpose. So authentic leadership becomes really relevant now and more relevant than it's ever been.
Yeah, no, I think we definitely do have a different generation of people that, as you said, our parents' generation, they worked to live basically. And there was a job for life and all sorts of things, and people would stay in a job for 30, 40 years. Those days have long gone. And I think, as we discussed, mental health, happiness, and achievement and purpose are significantly more driving factors, I think, to the younger generation than they were at any other time in human history, from what I can gather. And so if you are an authentic leader, because very much you are putting yourself out there, because this is my purpose, this is my personal values. Is it not more? I don't know how to describe it. Are you not more concerned, or are people not more concerned about criticism? Because the criticism then becomes more about. It's not a criticism of just an action. It's a criticism of your own. It's about a criticism of your core, isn't it? Your core beliefs and your personal values.
Well, there's definitely one way to view it. It is definitely more scary because you're exposing your vulnerability, and that's also maybe a little bit of a component of being an authentic leader. Is it involves showing vulnerability? You don't have to have all the answers, but I think that if you have the self-esteem to be an authentic leader, you will also want criticism. This is not your ego that's driving you anymore. You will welcome that criticism because if somebody walks into your office and says, what the hell did you do? Then, well, that person had that experience. I can agree with it, I can disagree with it, but they had it, and it's valuable feedback for me because there's someone in my company that's not engaged, that's not happy, and I need to know that as a leader so that I can improve, so that I can get better. And they will respect me more for it when I try to solve this and say, okay, I might even admit my mistake. I might even say, okay, I should have done that differently. I've learned a valuable lesson. I'm very thankful that you contributed with this feedback. That'll do something for you rather than just reacting from your ego and, firing the person or disciplining, doing whatever you think is your ego sort of demands of you to do. So I think as an authentic leader, we really got to embrace criticism because it's valuable feedback for how the world perceives us and how we can ultimately know ourselves and become more authentic.
Yeah, no, it's certainly on. I think I've done a few podcasts on leadership, and one of the things that I remember someone was telling me was that the way they view it, which is exactly as you just presented it, was that feedback is a gift, actually, for the recipient, because you should hopefully be able to grow and change if required. That actually makes you a better person and makes you actually even better able to fulfill the purpose that you should be now. And I think, and I put it in that position in that way purposefully because some people who aren't demonstrating authentic leadership would think that feedback is a criticism, and they always think it's a criticism, and they can't take it. Whereas I think that those authentic leaders, as you described, and I really like that separation that you described of ego versus self-esteem, because if you've got a massive ego, then anyone saying that what you've said is not quite right or it made me feel like this, then you're not giving them the external validation, are you? So they think, right, I don't want you to say that again, and I'm going to show you who's boss, as opposed to someone with high self-esteem who's strong enough to take it, understand it, internalize it, and do something positive with it.
Exactly. I think you described that very well, Hakeem, and especially this thing with if the ego is so predominant, right? And there's no self-esteem. Your ego demands you to do something of it because as soon as that employee takes away your ego, if he breaks that down, what's left but the low self-esteem? And then there's no ego and no self-esteem. That's a terrible position to be in. And I think we need to be able to embrace it also in business because a lot of business is about changing and innovating and becoming better, right? And I know that's something that's also that you talk a lot about, right? And if we need to innovate, we need to be able to take feedback because otherwise we're never going to get better. We're never going to change as individuals or the product that we have. But it also goes to authenticity in another way because authenticity is being the way we are and allowing other people to be the way we are. And I don't know, imagine I took you to a company and I'm showing you around and I say, okay, in this room here, we have our innovation department. And you look in and everybody's wearing blue shirts and a tie. You'd think, what kind of innovation department is this? I can't tell one apart from the other. And that's because, they're imitating. They're all looking the same. That would never happen, right? If you're doing innovation, you can't imitate because that's the exact opposite. And you also need to allow people to be themselves. And that's why when you look at the innovation departments, they look different from all the rest and they look different from each other, right? Because it's them being their authentic self that allows innovation to come.
And how would you, if you're in a business, because again, we said at the outset, lots of people understand that authentic leadership is something that we should strive for. Hopefully listen to this podcast. They'll realize why and the benefits. But if you're in a position where actually you can identify that, yes, it is something that I should be doing, I'm not currently doing it, how do you make that transition from, and it might not be completely inauthentic because there's obviously shades, but how do you get from the position where you are now to getting you and your organization to be in that position where you've got authentic leaders? And I think as you just described it there, not just an authentic leader is about being the way I am, but also letting other people be the way they are. And that maybe that second bit is the most difficult bit when you're in an organization.
Yeah, definitely, because you have to let go of a little bit of that control, that ego-dominated control that you're used to having, and you have to trust that the people that you're with and that you're working with are actually able to bring something new forward, something better forward, by letting go of this control. So that is the first step is to say, okay, I'm going to go a little bit out on a limb here. If we're looking at practical advice, of course you can read books and start, self-investigation. There's a lot of things you can do to try to understand yourself and understand your purpose. But ultimately, you have to start by letting go of your control a little bit. But that is how we grow. Every growth that happens within us stems from some sort of losing control just for a little bit.
And so if you and I know you do, if you, when you go into a business and you're looking at how to make that organization more authentic, what are the first steps or the key things that you do to sort of like move them through and actually improve their performance / leadership?
Well, the first thing I do is I listen. I do a lot of listening, right? Because I need to understand what's going on in the individuals that are there, and then we have to look at, is there something here? Is there something structural here that actually does not promote authenticity, right? There can be something structural we'll have to look at, but I don't know. The first thing I will need to know is I'll need to listen. And and of course, you also have to show. Hopefully, when you listen, people start to show a little bit of vulnerability, and if we have that trust and that vulnerability, well, then we have a starting point for working towards authenticity. If people do not want comfortable showing vulnerability, if they are not comfortable trying to, just put the ego aside for a little bit, then it becomes a lot more difficult to work with. So, as a consultant, for me, it's very important to try and understand the people that I'm working with here in the situation, because everybody is authentic in their own unique way.
And you talked about, some of the steps were, self-reflection, reading books. So just on that note, and obviously you've got your own book, and we'll put the link and the link to all of Mark's resources in the podcast description. But can you recommend any other books, including your own, or resources for someone who does want to learn more about authentic leadership and wants to move on?
Yeah, I think there's some good books out there. There's definitely one that I'm very fond of is Brene Brown. If you know Brene Brown, she wrote a book called Dare to Lead. It's a really good book. True North by, I think his name is Bill George, is also a good book. Of course, one can also read The Art of Being Authentic, which is the book I wrote. It's not so much a business book, but the interesting thing about this is authenticity. It's not something you can separate. Sometimes we talk about, we have a business, a professional life, and a personal life. But in essence, everything is personal. We might have a private life and we might have a professional life, but everything is personal. So, when we bring our personal values and if we try to cultivate a skill like empathy, it's impossible to only cultivate empathy in a business setting. When you start cultivating it, you're going to show more empathy at home as well, and maybe you even want to start cultivating it at home and then bring it to the workplace. So the separation between you can't separate it into a professional and a personal life. No, we can separate it into a business context and a private context, but it's all personal.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that people often think that they can check their personality at the door, either at home or when they go into the office. And I think that way lies madness, because you're one person. And I think, as you just identified there, if you're trying to do the two things, I think it causes problems, it causes rifts, and either at home or at work, somebody's going to notice that you're not being authentic. And I think it doesn't really help you as an individual. It doesn't help you manage a team, because when you're spending so much time in a workplace, people will see whether or not you're being authentic, or whether or not you're you're creating a persona. And I remember I always used to give that advice to people when they're going for interviews. And I don't know whether it's good advice, but it seems to have stood people in good stead. I used to say, well, if you pretend you're something you're not, then they may reject you. And had you been yourself, they may have accepted you. So if you're going to be rejected, you want to be rejected because you know that they don't like you or your values, which then means that company's not right for you. And you want to be getting a job based on you and your personality, because then you know that the chances are you're more likely to fit into that organization because you've been authentic and you've been honest to people and yourself, which I think helps in an organization, and it helps recruiters as well. So you're not recruiting someone and then finding, oh, you're completely dissimilar to the way you were in the interview. So yeah, that's one of my learnings over the years of interviewing people, that just be yourself, and it leads to much better outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. Being authentic, being yourself is sustainable. Trying to pretend that you're somebody you're not, trying to fit in by being someone you're not, is going to be extremely stressful for you in the long run. If you're a leader, your staff is going to pick up on it. They're not going to trust you. They're not going to follow you. As opposed to being yourself and fitting in by being yourself, well, that allows you to be authentic, and the people you work with will trust you. They'll follow you, and you'll build sustainable relationships.
Yeah, no, I think that trust element is the key, isn't it? I think that when I speak to people in businesses, when they have an issue with a manager, often I would say probably 99% of the time, it's that I don't trust the person. I don't trust them. I don't believe in them. Which is exactly what you're talking about. That's based on lack of authenticity. They've not been able to build a relationship because you say one thing, you do something different. There's no congruence between your actions and your words and your activities.
Yes, exactly. And actually, that makes me think of something which I think actually is probably an interesting thing to just touch upon briefly about authenticity, and that is the intention that we bring to things. And that's where self-awareness becomes so important, because the intention we bring to things as a leader, the intention we have, and the intention we have in our personal life, well, that's going to affect the end result of what we do. I'll give an example, just a quick example from just for in your personal life. Let's imagine that you and I decided to go out and feed the homeless. We're going to do this together. Well, okay, we do that. If you do it with an intention that you genuinely want people to feel better, you want to help these people, right? You're going to come out of that feeling stronger, with a higher self-esteem. You're going to feel good about yourself. You're going to have a good emotional well-being. If I go out and do the exact same thing, but my intention is I want everybody to see what I'm doing is the right thing. Well, all of a sudden, I'm telling myself I'm not good enough as I am. I need everybody else to validate me externally, right?
Yeah.
So I'm doing the same thing, but I'm getting a completely different emotional response from the same kind of action. And that goes to being an authentic leader as well. And that's why you can't copy someone else's. You can't see, oh, that was Steve Jobs' purpose. I want that to be my purpose as well. You can't do that. You can't, because you have to have the right intention as an authentic leader, but also as an authentic person, in order to get the benefits and in order to actually be authentic.
Okay, thank you. So coming towards the end, I've just got a couple of questions, which are a couple of them random, and then one to wrap up with. So, if there was a historical figure, I'm just interested. If there was a historical figure who's no longer alive that you could go back in time and meet, who would it be and why?
I would go back and meet Nelson Mandela. And I would go back and meet him for the specific reason that he was incarcerated for so many years. It was such a struggle. And then afterwards, he comes out, he comes to power. He is the man in charge. He is, to use my example from earlier, the chairman of the board. He is the president. And then he goes, okay, we need everyone. We need to learn from this. We need to have a commission of truth. We're going to sit down, and everybody that comes and tells what they've done, we won't punish them, because we need this to heal as a nation. That is an exceptional display of authenticity, and I would so much like to hear, meet him and hear about that.
Yeah, no, I think Nelson Mandela is probably, when I asked that question, that's probably one of the most popular people. I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it? How authenticity, irrespective of your political views, where you live, causes people to gravitate towards you. Because the amount of people I've spoken from America, Denmark, Holland, wherever they may be, lots of them will say Nelson Mandela, and they're all completely different people. And it's that authenticity that people gravitate towards. So if there was nothing else you took away from it in terms of authentic leadership, you're going to get a lot of people actually interested in what you do and what you say, precisely because you're authentic and you're not doing it from a point of ego. You're doing it from a point of actual self-esteem, which is, that's a really interesting reflection, actually. And then the other thing, which I suppose is kindly linked, but if you were able to go back in time to your 20s, what's the one thing that you now know that you wish you knew then, that you would say, right, Mark, make sure you do X, Y, and Z, or don't do?
Yeah. I think I would say to myself, if I went back, or if I was my younger self, I would stop caring as much about fitting in and caring much more about, as you said it with the job interview, about being myself.
Yeah, no, I think everybody could take that. I tell my kids that all the time, actually, whether or not it gets through. They're 15 and 13, so hopefully they'll grow with that view in mind, so they start from a good point. So no, I appreciate your time, and I suppose one last question would be: people watching this, guaranteed they'll get to this point. But if they've got to this point and they've not listened to anything else, they've been, watching TV at the same time, what's the one or two key takeaways you'd say about authentic leadership that you want to make sure that people take away from our time together?
Well, I think the first thing is that being who you are, being authentic, it's not something you can run away from. It's a strength you have. And that strength you need to put in play. You need to put it in play in your private life, but you certainly need to put it in play in leadership and in your business. That you have to put into play your authenticity. So that is definitely the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is it's going to take courage. It always takes courage to not fit in. But honestly, when you talk about your brand, if I told you, would you like a brand that fitted in or stood out? I think most of our listeners would say, I'd like a brand that stands out. Well, you can start by standing out as a leader yourself.
Excellent. I think that's a perfect place on which to finish. I really appreciate your time. There's been some gems. I've been writing furiously down here. And as I said to you at the beginning, I learn probably more from these sessions than my listeners do. So it's a bit self-indulgent, but I love doing it. So Mark Meyer, thank you very much for joining me on the Hands-On Business podcast to talk about authentic leadership.
Thank you.
So thanks very much to Mark for coming on to talk about authentic leadership. There's so many ways that you can look at leadership, and I never get tired of talking about it. It's something I really love to discuss on the show. So many things to unpick there, but one of the things that stood out to me was when Mark was talking about the difference between purpose and goals. And, that purpose without goals doesn't really make any sense. And, that having a purpose is all about having a good self-esteem where you're not obsessed with your ego, and that it's actually inauthentic leaders are obsessed with their ego and looking for external validation. There's just loads and loads of stuff in there. But I found that really, really illuminating. So go and find those books that Mark mentioned, and make sure you definitely check out his book, The Art of Being Authentic. And don't forget to check out the show notes at www.thesalesaccelerationformula.com. And as always, Subscribe, like, and share with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who you think may be interested. But most of all, keep the feedback coming so that we can continue to improve and give you more of what you like. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and as I always do. Keep listening and keep growing.